Chapter 6 The Vaults of Ylourgne. Gaspard was revived after a while by the chillness of the water in which he lay. His garments were half soaked, and the slimy, mephitic pool, as he discovered by his first movement, was within an inch of his mouth. He could hear a steady, monotonous dripping somewhere in the rayless night of his dungeon. He staggered to his feet, finding that his bones were still intact, and began a cautious exploration. Foul drops fell upon his hair and lifted face as he moved. His feet slipped and splashed in the rotten water. There were angry, vehement hissings, and serpentine coils slithered coldly across his ankles. He soon came to a rough wall of stone, and, following the wall with his fingertips, he tried to determine the extent of the oubliette. The place was more or less circular, without corners, and he failed to form any just idea of its circuit. Somewhere in his wanderings he found a shelving pile of rubble that rose above the water against the wall, and here, for the sake of comparative dryness and comfort, he ensconced himself, after dispossessing a number of outraged reptiles. These creatures, it seemed, were inoffensive and probably belonged to some species of water snake, but he shivered at the touch of their clammy scales. Sitting on the rubble heap, Gaspard reviewed in his mind the various horrors of a situation that was infinitely dismal and desperate. He had learned the incredible, soul-shaking secret of Ylourgne, the unimaginably monstrous and blasphemous project of Neter. But now, immured in this noisome hole as in a subterranean tomb, in depths beneath the devil-haunted pile, he could not even warn the world of the imminent menace. The wallet of food, now more than half empty, with which he started from Vion, was still hanging at his back, and he assured himself by investigation that his captors had not troubled to deprive him of his dagger. Gnawing on a crust of stale bread in the darkness, and caressing with his hand the hilt of the precious weapon, he sought for some rift in the all-environing despair. He had no means of measuring the black hours that went over him with the slowness of a slime-clogged river crawling in blind silence to a subterranean sea. The ceaseless drip of water, probably from sunken hill springs that had supplied the castle in former years, alone broke the stillness. But the sound became in time an equivocal monotone that suggested to his half-delirious mind the mirthless and perpetual chuckling of unseen imps. At last, from sheer bodily exhaustion, he fell into troubled, nightmare-ridden slumber. He could not tell if it were night or noon in the world without when he awakened, for the same stagnant darkness, unrelieved by ray or glimmer, brimmed the oubliette. Shivering, he became aware of a steady draught that blew upon him, a dank, unwholesome air, like the breath of unsunned vaults that had wakened into cryptic life and activity during his sleep. He had not noticed the draught heretofore, and his numb brain was startled into sudden hope by the intimation which it conveyed. Obviously, there was some underground rift or channel through which the air entered, and this rift might somehow prove to be a place of egress from the oubliette. Getting to his feet, he groped uncertainly forward in the direction of the draught. He stumbled over something that cracked and broke beneath his heels, and narrowly checked himself from falling on his face in the slimy, serpent-haunted pool. Before he could investigate the obstruction or resume his blind groping, he heard a harsh grating noise above, and a wavering shaft of yellow light came down through the oubliette's opened mouth. Dazzled, he looked up and saw the round hole 10 or 12 feet overhead, through which a dark hand had reached down with a flaring torch. A small basket containing a loaf of coarse bread and a bottle of wine was being lowered at the end of a cord. Gaspard took the bread and wine, and the basket was drawn up. Before the withdrawal of the torch and the redepositing of the slab, he contrived to make a hasty but thorough survey of his dungeon. The place was roughly circular, as he had surmised, and was perhaps 15 feet in diameter. The thing over which he had stumbled was a human skeleton, lying half on the rubble heap, half in the filthy water. It was brown and rotten with age, and its garments had long melted away in patches of liquid running mold. The walls were guttered and runneled by centuries of ooze, and their very stone, it seemed, was rotting slowly to decay. In the opposite side, at the bottom, he saw the opening he had suspected, a low mouth, not much bigger than a fox's hole, into which the sluggish water flowed. His heart sank at the sight, for even if the water were deeper than it seemed, the hole was far too strait for the passage of a man's body. In a state of hopelessness that was like a veritable suffocation, he found his way back to the rubble pile when the light had been withdrawn. The loaf of bread and the bottle of wine were still in his hands. Mechanically, with dull, sodden hunger, he munched and drank. Afterwards, he felt stronger, and the sour, common wine served to warm him, and perhaps helped to inspire him with the idea which he presently conceived. Finishing the bottle, he found his way across the dungeon to the low, burrow-like hole. The entering air current had strengthened, and this he took for a good omen. Drawing his dagger, he started to pick with the point at the half-rotten, decomposing wall in an effort to enlarge the opening. He was forced to kneel in noisome silt, and the writhing coils of water-snakes, hissing frightfully, crawled across his legs as he worked. Evidently, the hole was their means of ingress and egress to and from the oubliette. The stone crumbled readily beneath his dagger, and Gaspard forgot the horror and ghastliness of his situation in the hope of escape. He had no means of knowing the thickness of the wall or the nature and extent of the subterranes that lay beyond, but he felt sure that there was some channel of connection with the outer air. For hours or days, it seemed, he toiled with his dagger, digging blindly at the soft wall and removing the debris that splashed in the water beside him. After a while, prone on his belly, he crept into the hole he had enlarged, and burrowing like some laborious mole, he made his way onward, inch by inch. At last, to his prodigious relief, the dagger point went through into empty space. He broke away with his hands the thin shell of obstructing stone that remained. Then, crawling on in the darkness, he found that he could stand upright on a sort of shelving floor. Straightening his cramped limbs, he moved on very cautiously. He was in a narrow vault or tunnel, whose sides he could touch simultaneously with his outstretched fingertips. The floor was a downward incline, and the water deepened, rising to his knees and then to his waist. Probably the place had once been used as an underground exit from the castle, and the roof, falling in, had dammed the water. More than a little dismayed, Gaspard began to wonder if he had exchanged the foul, skeleton-haunted oubliette for something even worse. The night around and before him was still untouched by any ray, and the air current, though strong, was laden with a dankness and a mouldiness as of interminable vaults. Touching the tunnel sides at intervals as he plunged hesitantly into the deepening water, he found a sharp angle giving upon free space at his right. The space proved to be the mouth of an intersecting passage, whose flooded bottom was at least level and went no deeper into the stagnant foulness. Exploring it, he stumbled over the beginning of a flight of upward steps. Mounting these through the shoaling water, he soon found himself on dry stone. The stairs, narrow, broken, irregular, without landings, appeared to wind in some eternal spiral that was coiled lightlessly about the bowels of Ylourgne. They were close and stifling as a tomb, and plainly they were not the source of the air current which Gaspard had started to follow. Whither they would lead he knew not, nor could he tell if they were the same stairs by which he had been conducted to his dungeon. But he climbed steadily, pausing only at long intervals to regain his breath as best he could in the dead, mephitis-burdened air. At length, in the solid darkness far above, he began to hear a mysterious, muffled sound. A dull but recurrent crash as of mighty blocks and masses of falling stone. The sound was unspeakably ominous and dismal, and it seemed to shake the unfathomable walls around Gaspard, and to thrill with the sinister vibration in the steps on which he trod. He climbed now with redoubled caution and alertness, stopping ever and anon to listen. The recurrent crashing noise grew louder, more ominous, as if it were immediately above, and the listener crouched on the dark stairs for a time that might have been many minutes, without daring to go further. At last, with disconcerting suddenness, the sound came to an end, leaving a strained and fearful stillness. With many baleful conjectures, not knowing what fresh enormity he should find, Gaspard ventured to resume his climbing. Again, in the blank and solid stillness, he was met by a sound, the dim, reverberant chanting of voices, as in some satanic mass or liturgy with dirge-like cadences that turned to intolerably soaring paeans of evil triumph. Long before he could recognize the words, he shivered at the strong, malefic throbbing of the measured rhythm, whose fall and rise appeared somehow to correspond to the heartbeats of some colossal demon. The stairs turned for the 100th time in their tortuous spiral, and coming forth from that long midnight, Gaspard blinked in the wan glimmering that streamed toward him from above. The choral voices met him in a more sonorous burst of infernal sound, and he knew the words for those of a rare and potent incantation, used by sorcerers for a supremely foul, supremely maleficent purpose. Affrightedly, as he climbed the last steps, he knew the thing that was taking place amid the ruins of Ylourgne. Lifting his head warily above the castle floor, he saw that the stairs ended in a far corner of a vast room, in which he had beheld Neterre's unthinkable creation. The whole extent of the internally dismantled building lay before him, filled with a weird glare, in which the beams of the slightly gibbous moon were mingled with the ruddy flames of dying athanors and the coiling, multicolored tongues that rose from necromantic braziers. Gaspard, for an instant, was puzzled by the flood of full moonlight amid the ruins. Then he saw that almost the whole inner wall of the castle, giving on the courtyard, had been removed. It was the tearing down of the prodigious blocks, no doubt through an extra-human labor levied by sorcery, that he had heard during his ascent from the subterranean vaults. His blood curdled. He felt an actual horripilation as he realized the purpose for which the wall had been demolished. It was evident that a whole day and part of another night had gone by since his immurement, for the moon rode high in the pale sapphire welkin. Bathed in its chilly glare, the huge vats no longer emitted their eerie and electric phosphorescence. The couch of Saracen fabrics, on which Gaspard had beheld the dying dwarf, was now half hidden from view by the mounting fumes of braziers and thuribles, amid which the sorcerer's 10 pupils, clad in sable and scarlet, were performing their hideous and repugnant rite, with its malefically measured litany. Fearfully, as one who confronts an apparition reared up from nether hell, Gaspard beheld the Colossus that lay inert, as if in cyclopean sleep, on the castle flags. The thing was no longer a skeleton. The limbs were rounded into bossed, enormous thews, like the limbs of biblical giants. The flanks were like an insuperable wall. The deltoids of the mighty chest were broad as platforms. The hands could have crushed the bodies of men like millstones. But the face of the stupendous monster, seen in profile athwart the pouring moon, was the face of the satanic dwarf, Neterre. magnified 100 times, but the same in its implacable madness and malevolence. The vast bosom seemed to rise and fall, and during a pause of the necromantic ritual, Gaspard heard the unmistakable sound of a mighty respiration. The eye in the profile was closed, but its lid appeared to tremble like a great curtain, as if the monster were about to awake, and the outflung hand, with fingers pale and bluish as a row of corpses, twitched unquietly on the castle flags. An insupportable terror seized the watcher, but even this terror could not induce him to return to the noisome vaults he had left. With infinite hesitation and trepidation, he stole forth from the corner, keeping in a zone of ebon shadow that flanked the castle wall. As he went, he saw for a moment, through bellying folds of vapour, the couch on which the shrunken form of Neter was lying pallid and motionless. It seemed that the dwarf was dead, or that he had fallen into a stupor preceding death. Then the choral voices, crying their dreadful incantation, rose higher in satanic triumph. The vapours eddied like a hell-born cloud, coiling above the sorcerers in python-shaped volumes, and hiding again the orient couch and its corpse-like occupant. A thraldom of measureless evil oppressed the air. Gaspard felt that the awful transmigration, evoked and implored with ever-swelling liturgic blasphemies, was about to take place, had perhaps already occurred. He thought that the breathing giant stirred, like one who tosses in light slumber. Soon the towering, massively recumbent bulk was interposed between Gaspard and the chanting necromancers. They had not seen him, and now he dared to run swiftly, and gained the courtyard unpursued and unchallenged. Thence, without looking back, he fled like a devil-hunted thing upon the steep and chasm-riven slopes below Ylourgne.